I could play devil's advocate and propose to you some of the most powerful arguments against race realism that
Sure.
I've had to deal with. And one of the most common is the idea that because there's more genetic difference, more genetic variation between people of the same race than there is between the different races, that race is somehow an illegitimate concept. And this was something that was proposed by the Harvard geneticist Richard Lewontin. I think it goes back to the 1980s already. The idea that there is, in fact, more genetic variation within groups than between groups. And people then somehow slyly suggest that this could mean that you could be genetically more closely related to someone of a different race than to someone of your own race. That's in fact impossible. You are more closely related to people of your own race. But to point out that there is all of this genetic variation within people of even the same family, even within the same tribe, that does not negate the fact that there is a relatively small amount of genetic patterning that can be used to distinguish people of different races. In the case of human beings, about 15% of the genome, that's a small portion of the genome, is the part that is patterned in different ways that result in racial differences. If you draw a parallel between that 15%, which is at the time of Lewontin's discovery, it was thought to be a surprisingly small figure. This was a legitimate scientific discovery about the commonality of the genome across different human groups. But if you want to make a parallel between human differences and dog breeds, for example, in the case of dog breeds, there's about 30% of the genome. The proportion compared to humans is about twice as broad, in which there is different patterning that accounts for the fact that you have different dog breeds. For dogs as well, there is much more in common than the amount of genetic difference that separates them. And yet, in the case of dogs, you have differences as vast as Irish wolfhounds and Chihuahuas, greyhounds and beagles. You have differences in intelligence and temperament. Of course, these have been bred by human beings, but bred probably most of these differences only in the last, say, 500 or 600 years. The point is, there is enormous amount of genetic difference between people who are in fact genetically of the same subspecies or race. We don't fully understand the purpose of all the genetic aspects of human beings. The genome is still a mysterious place. And see, people talk about junk DNA because we don't really know what these genes do, what these parts of the genome do. I think the term junk DNA is a little bit dangerous because there are probably aspects of this unknown and undeciphered DNA that probably do play important roles in the development of human beings. But still, that is an argument that's commonly made, that there is more genetic variation within a race than the genetic variation that distinguishes races. But one parallel argument you could make to that is that if you're comparing the heights of men and women, there's obviously far more variation in the heights of men or women than there is between the average height of men and women. That doesn't mean that men and women are the same height. The amount of variation within a group does not negate the fact that there are differences between the groups. Furthermore, the genetic difference between men and women is very, very small. Genetically, a man and a woman are essentially the same except for the presence or the absence of a Y chromosome. And yet, that amount of genetic difference can result in human morphology in which there are entire organs that are present or absent, depending on what sex you are. So small amounts of genetic difference can go a long way in establishing morphological and physiological and even behavioral differences.